Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I had a go at my new Dendrobium today, and this is going to be a full mounting video on the grounds that quite a few previous mounting videos have been skipped as to the various processes, and anybody who runs a channel has to appreciate that you get new people in and they're not necessarily going to go and watch all your old videos. Yeah? So I'll go through the whole process this time, starting with the coffee, as it's that time of day. Different time of day it might not be coffee. Anyway, that's the mount I'm going to use. The plant I've got will grow quite large, but they don't have extensive root systems, so it doesn't need a giant mount. It would only be wasted. Probably wouldn't send roots out and cover all of it. And quite honestly, with a mount, the roots will go around the back of the mount if they want. Once they start attaching, they will just run as far as they need to go, and if that means going round the back and round the bottom and over the top, so be it. That's how it would grow on a branch or on a tree. It's not a big deal. Don't worry if your roots go round the back. That is a screwdriver, but it's got a sharpened end, so it's no good for doing screws up anymore. But it's very good at making a hole through cork as a starter hole, yeah, because it's got like a blade on the end, twisting it round, and it just goes through quite easy. But the hole's not big enough, so I use a crosshead screwdriver to go through again and again. By turning that, it sort of cuts its way through and makes a much bigger hole, which the wire will then go through without too much trouble. Right, so that's those out the way. Piece of wire. As it's a new hook, I always cut quite long on the grounds. I don't know how long the hook needs to be until I decide where it's going to go in the grow room and whether it needs to hang quite a way down or not. So I always leave the hook quite long. Try and find me hole. I always go from the back to the front. I'm just going to have to go through again. That hole's not clean. Well, there's something stuck in it because the wire's not going through easily. Yeah, it was just a piece in the way, I think. There we go. That should do it. See daylight through it. That'll do. Yeah. And all I do is I come through from the back. I need enough there to go back over the top and round that piece. It just makes it secure. So just loop that bit round there, yeah, and then all I do is pinch that tight with the pliers and it won't move. So that's that done. As I say, I won't actually make the hook on the end because I don't know whether I want it there, there or there. You see what I mean? So I'll do that later. Right, that's that. That can go out the way now. Don't need much of that. Let's play what's in my pot. See, the label's quite good because it actually says Dendrobium primulinum yellow throat form. Well, that form's actually got a name. It's variety Laos, because the version with the yellow throat, I believe, is only found in Laos, whereas Dendrobium primulinum is found in lots of places. I don't expect to have an extensive root system. You'll make me a liar, why don't you? Oh, it's a solid lump of moss. Never mind, we have roots. That's all I'm interested in. I'll see if this teases out. If it doesn't, I'll just run it under the tap. I suspect the roots in the centre of the moss will be dead, and the live ones will be around the outside because they've managed to push through it and find a place where there's at least a little bit of air. But if you look at this pot, it's got a single hole in the base, so the water wouldn't drain out of that very quickly. So the plant's been probably kept a bit too wet. Which, I mean, if this came from Taiwan, I believe, was the guy I bought it from, Ten Shin. And if this came over with him now, then out there, despite being in moss, it'd probably dry pretty quick. different atmosphere and environment to what I've got. But it's amazing if you want to know how tight moss has been packed, when you finish teasing it all out, have a look at the size of the pile compared with the pot it came out of. If they're roughly the same, the moss was loosely packed. If you got 3 times the amount of moss than you could imagine ever going in that pot, then it was rammed in. And by doing that with moss, you shut out the air. And in a lot of cases that will degrade the roots quite badly. As I said, you know, people growing in different environments, moss has a different effect. Here in the UK, it can stay wet a very, very long time. And if it stays wet a long time, obviously the air's been shut out a long time, and that can lose you your roots. So it's best not to do it in the country where I live. And then I say the country where I live. In that country there could be greenhouses, windowsills, cooler rooms, warmer rooms with air conditioning or central heating. All these are different environments and they all have a different effect on the way moss works. But I never expected to get a decent root system out of that pot, and I have. That is a very good root system, far better than I ever expected. Far better. You're going to hate me for this, but I'm going to explain why I'm going to do it. This is a branching root system. The roots will branch out, and if a root branches out, it's got a new growing tip. Now when you put a plant on a mount, the existing roots will not attach to the mount, only new ones. So by doing this, I'm creating an environment where new root tips will grow. And I'm also going to, actually there's so few dead ones on there, I'm not even going to bother trying to get at them. I'm happy with that. And the other reason for doing that was so they don't all hang off the mount. Mind you, I've got a few real manky ones in there. We'll let those off. Another one there. Once the outside of the root pulls off, you're left with like a little tiny piece of stringy, wiry type stuff, which is in fact the real root. This, what we're looking at, is not the roots. The actual root is inside. This is what a root looks like. Yeah? This is the velamen, the coating, the casing. And orchids evolved that over the years, quite a lot of years I suspect, to enable them to take water on board and nutrients very, very fast, because the velamen works like a sponge. As soon as any moisture gets near it, it sucks it up. And then the little root inside can help itself whenever it wants and take as much or as little as it needs. It's the velamen that stores it. Now what I've got here is one plant. I was expecting that to come out as 2. And that is joined. So we've got some older canes and we've got some new ones. I'll clear that up for a minute, so I've still got enough room to work. Just about. See what I mean about volume of moss? All of that came out of that tiny little pot. Absolutely jammed in there. And it doesn't smell too bad. So this plant was probably put in there later last year perhaps. I see no brand new roots growing at the moment, but by trimming those ends it should trigger some branching, which those branches will then work like brand new roots. So I should get some new roots to attach to the mount sometime later this year. Right, now choices. That plant looks fine, doesn't it? Like that. Yeah? That's not how it's going to go. How it's going to go is like that. Because I know the length these canes are going to grow to, and the plants in the wild hang down. They become pendulous. They grow long canes, they start off growing upwards, they arch over, and they end up being pendulous. And that's how they bloom. If you want to put it in a pot or mount it upright, that's fine, but you'll probably end up having to tie the canes or stake them, because they will want to hang over. It's the sheer weight of the new canes combined with the weight of the leaves basically says I want to go the other way up. I'm going to put this slightly off to the side because that's a, if you look, I've got a big crevice down the side of there. I'd rather the roots started on the flat bit, yeah? So I'm going to mount that like that, just low enough down for those roots to go on. Because remember, when this starts to root with new roots, they'll come out in all directions, and some of them will go that way. They won't all head away from the canes, not once it's mounted. So, roots on the mount without any moss behind them. Reason being, oh hang on, I've forgotten. There's something I keep forgetting to do that I get told off. If you're going to use fishing line, get the fishing line on the mount first. And then when you try and sort your plant out, it doesn't knock all your moss and everything off. And it's an old habit, I'm afraid, and it's not establishing itself very well with me. I still forget. I usually remember just at that point, after I've got my plant in the right place and started to put the moss on. Never mind. Okay, I just start with a slip knot basically, pull that tight, then put that on the mount around where the base of the plant will be, which, because I've already put the plant on and decided where I want it, I know where that's going to be, and that will be the first turn basically. Now what have you done? How can you have got hooked up like that? That's not possible. There we go. The impossible is just something that nobody's worked out how to do yet. Once upon a time, travelling round the world was impossible because it was flat. Aha. You see what I mean though? Right, now we've got our loop in place, we can go back to where we were before, get our plant where we want it, on that flat piece, right in the middle. Now we go back to where we were 2 minutes ago, which is to get some moss around these roots. Now I would like to still be able to see some of these roots through the moss. I don't want a huge wodge of moss on this. This is a winter resting type dendrobium, so come the winter time I want this to be dry for relatively long periods, and it's not going to do that if it's buried under a huge wad of moss. So the moss is quite a thin layer, and if I've got a bit too much, you can tease a bit off because it's on top of the roots. That's about as much as I need, I think. Right, and now the reason for putting this bit on first is that now when I start winding this round, it's not going to knock everything off. There is a good reason for it. I spent years not doing it that way until somebody suggested, why don't you put your fishing line on first? Duh. So now I do when I remember, which is most of the time, but not all the time. Okay. That's got the moss fixed. Just need to go round once more, just for that last little bit. Notice I'm not tying the plant this time round because the plant is hanging. I don't need to secure the plant against the mount. When you mount that way up, the plant sometimes will flop away from the mount, and you need to put a loop round, like say that cane, to hold it in place. But when it's hanging down, that doesn't happen, so you don't need to worry. And I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but where I first started, made my slip knot, obviously I had a loose end. That loose end is there, and where I headed off around the mount, I left a V shape between the slip knot and the first turn. And that V is a brilliant place to put your last thread through, and it gives you something to pull against, yeah? Because you've already got a knot there, yeah? Then all you've got to do is put another knot there, hold everything in place. I always use a reef knot, which is right over left, left over right, or the other way around if you want to, but it doesn't slip. If you do right over left, it has a tendency when you pull it to just come undone. So that's that. I'm not going to bother putting that tag on there for the simple reason it hasn't got the variety name on it, and I'm not going to get this plant muddled up with anything else. It's the only new one I've bought for a long time. Okay, so that's it, mounted. The two new growths have stalled a little, probably lack of hydration in transport. See, this leaf's a little curly, and these top parts are quite pale. So I've got a feeling the plant may have spent some time in the dark as it made its way to me. Yeah, so that's it. Dendrobium primulinum variety Laos. And the progress on this plant now, from now till the end of the growing season, will depend on whether it's possible to get this to bloom. These canes, somebody said, oh, don't worry, that's blooming size. On my primulinum, they're twice that size and some. So I know that's the full size potential of these canes. That doesn't mean a smaller cane can't bloom, but the blooms are induced on this plant by a winter rest. If I haven't got two strong new growths and some new roots, I probably won't rest that because it won't be strong enough yet. And I may lose out on the blooms next year and get a few or none. But I'm willing to do that for the sake of the plant. If these two canes push on way longer than anything that's there and mature nicely, then there's enough strength in that to produce some buds and some blooms. But that's, you know, that's a wait and see. Anyway, that's that one done. Now all I've got to do is go and decide where it's going in the grow room and decide whether I need a long hook to get the plant low down on the hanging rack so it's not bumping into anything else, or whether I need a short hook, and I'll do that out in the grow room. You don't need to see that, it's just a matter of bending that over and cutting the end off, no big deal. So that's me mounting an orchid. As I said, not orchids go up, not all my mounted orchids go that way up. If that was an oncidium, it would go that way up because that's how they grow. But most of the longer cane dendrobiums tend to arch over and droop down. And certainly the other one I've got that's a relatively mature plant does that. The new growths sometimes point straight upwards, but then they arch and then the weight just pulls them down. So they end up pointing downwards. But not all dendrobiums grow like that. Okay, see you next time. Bye for now.